Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States, would be inaugurated on March 4th, 1801, becoming the first president to take office in Washington, D.C. His vice president, Aaron Burr, would also take office after the dramatic tie-breaking vote in the House of Representatives, which threw the vote to Thomas Jefferson. In his inaugural address, he insisted that differences of opinion did not mean differences in principle. He famously stated, "We are all Republicans, we are all Federalists." In today's episode, we're going to look at how prophetic these words were as we deep dive into Jefferson's America. Let's get started. Shortly after assuming the presidency, Jefferson is going to face his first foreign policy test in the form of the Tripolitan War, also in some circles known as the Barbary Wars. This issue stems from a long-standing dispute between the United States and the Barbary states, which are located in the North African region, where America had been paying tribute to these states in order for protection against piracy in the Mediterranean Sea, specifically to countries like Tripoli. And on May 14th, 1801, Yusuf Karamini, the Pasha of Tripoli, is going to declare war on the United States because of their refusal to increase tribute payments. And he will symbolically sever the flagpole at the U.S. consulate. And this is a brazen move. This is a very provocative act by Karamini. And not only is he declaring war with this symbolic gesture, he is also stating publicly, by severing the flagpole at the U.S. consulate, that he is severing the relationship with Thomas Jefferson and his administration's policies. Jefferson's response to Tripolitan aggression would become emblematic of his administration's approach to foreign policy. Rather than giving in to Tripoli's demands or engaging in prolonged negotiations, Jefferson is going to take decisive action against these pirates in the Mediterranean. He will quickly mobilize the naval forces under the command of Commodore Edward Preble, who will engage in these raids against Barbary pirates, challenging their dominance in the region while also asserting American power. Jefferson's handling of the Tripolitan War was a defining aspect of his administration. It showcased his willingness to defend American interests abroad while at the same time upholding really core principles of sovereignty and national dignity. While this Barbary threat will continue well beyond his administration, Jefferson laid the groundwork for subsequent administrations to confront the Barbary menace and to safeguard American interests in both the Mediterranean and beyond. Domestically, Jefferson's first term saw significant changes and initiatives. For example, on July 10th, 1801, he will appoint William C.C. Claiborne the territorial governor of Mississippi, marking the beginning of his efforts to organize and expand the nation's territories. Jefferson's aversion to pomp and circumstance were no more evident than in his decision to hand-deliver his State of the Union to the newly convened 7th Congress on December 8th, 1801, in writing. This established a precedent that would continue until Woodrow Wilson's presidency. But the early years of Jefferson's administration were also marked by legislative achievements. For example, in 1802, Congress will recognize the Tripolitan War, authorizing the president to arm merchant ships. You will also see Jefferson sign acts into law that will reduce the size of the army. He will repeal excise taxes and revise naturalization acts. However, the Louisiana Purchase stands as one of the most important moments in the Jefferson era, forever altering the landscape and destiny of this young nation. In the early years of the 19th century, Jefferson's administration understood the importance of controlling the port of New Orleans for its nation's commerce and its westward expansion. And so, sensing an opportunity, Jefferson is going to dispatch James Monroe, as well as U.S. Minister Robert Livingston, to France in 1803 to see if France would be interested in selling the port of New Orleans and possibly even some adjacent territories. But Jefferson gives these two men very specific instructions. Guys, do not spend more than $10 million. However, when they arrive, the events that unfold, they could not have foreseen. Napoleon Bonaparte, then ruler of France, is not only going to offer to sell them the port of New Orleans, but all of Louisiana territory for a mere $15 million. Now, that is a bargain beyond bargains. But the problem is that's not what Jefferson said they could spend. Now, they're going to end up doing it. They're going to end up purchasing it and ask for forgiveness later. They will purchase Louisiana territory for $15 million, effectively doubling the size of the United States overnight for a mere 4 cents per acre. The significance of this offer is not lost on Jefferson, who understood the immense potential that this offer had for the growth and prosperity of the nation. And despite initial hesitations about the constitutionality of such a purchase, his pragmatic vision for the nation prevailed, and the deal will be finalized on April 30th, 1803. The Louisiana Purchase not only secured greater access to the Mississippi River and to the port of New Orleans, it also opened up vast expanses of fertile land for settlement and development. It facilitated westward expansion, paving the way for exploration and the eventual settlement of the American frontier. However, Jefferson's presidency was not without its own challenges and controversies. The Federalists, who opposed the Democratic Republicans and Jefferson's policies, said that he had overstepped his constitutional boundaries by trying to purchase this territory without explicit congressional approval. There will also be allegations of Jefferson having an affair with one of his enslaved women, Sally Hemings. And despite all of these accusations swirling in political circles and in the press, Jefferson maintained a public silence on this matter, instead focusing on his vision for the country. Jefferson's presidency was also engulfed in a war with the judiciary. A key battleground emerged between Jefferson's Republican faction and the entrenched Federalist-dominated judiciary, a clash that would shape American jurisprudence really forever. The Federalist-controlled Congress under the administrations of Washington and Adams had set up a judiciary system that heavily tilted in favor of the Federalist. This system, with its circuit courts headed up by Federalist justices, were seen as a bastion of Federalist influence, especially in their enforcement of the Alien and Sedition Acts in the Adams administration, which heavily targeted these Democratic Republicans like Jefferson. The situation escalated with the passage of the Judiciary Act of 1801 in the waning days of Adams' administration. This legislation, among other provisions, sought to reduce the size of the Supreme Court and to flood the judiciary system with Federalist justices, aiming to limit Jefferson's influence and to entrench Federalist power. Once Jefferson takes office, he will instruct his Secretary of State, James Madison, to block a lot of these appointees, stalling their addition to the bench. Jefferson, facing a judiciary that was dominated by his political opponents and fortified by lifetime appointments, sought to assert his own authority and diminish Federalist influence. In the 1800 elections, the Democratic Republicans are going to gain control of Congress, and they're going to quickly move to repeal the Judiciary Act of 1801, effectively dismantling Adams' midnight appointees and restoring balance to the judiciary. The clash between Jefferson and the Federalist-controlled judiciary also played out in the realm of impeachment. While Justice John Pickering, a staunch Federalist, was removed from the bench through impeachment, the unsuccessful attempt to remove Justice Samuel Chase through impeachment underscored the tensions between the branches of government. And it is in this tumultuous environment that we see the rise of Chief Justice John Marshall, a staunch Federalist who in 1803, in the landmark case Marbury versus Madison, as we talked about last episode, is going to articulate the principle of judicial review. In other words, he is establishing the court's ability to strike down congressional laws they deem as unconstitutional. And because of this decision, the courts have established their independence from the other branches, the legislative and executive, while at the same time being able to check the powers of both the legislative and the executive branches. And this is going to infuriate. It's going to exasperate Jefferson's frustrations with the Federalist-dominated court. The election of 1804 saw Jefferson running for his second term, bolstered by his administration's achievements and a relatively peaceful first term. In February of 1804, 100 Democratic Republicans will meet in Washington to nominate Thomas Jefferson and George Clinton of New York by acclamation. This was the first caucus in U.S. history. The Federalists, who are just completely demoralized and disorganized, are going to informally nominate Charles C. Pinckney and Rufus King. President Jefferson, feeling very confident in his administration's success, is going to quickly go after the reeling Federalist candidates and their party by saying that they are close-minded and unwilling to open their party to populist demands. And so Jefferson will win in a landslide in 1804, winning 162 electoral votes to Pinckney's 14, with only Delaware, Connecticut, and 2 Maryland electors resisting that Democratic-Republican wave. Jefferson is overjoyed by this victory and wished that George Washington had lived long enough to see the day when the country experienced a new unity of mind and politics. During Jefferson's second term, he will navigate the country through significant events. In 1804, his vice president for the first term, Aaron Burr, will kill Alexander Hamilton in the infamous duel, which is probably the most infamous personal conflict in American history. In 1807, Thomas Jefferson will actually be subpoenaed by Burr's attorneys to provide documents in hopes that the documents provided would help exonerate Aaron Burr. Additionally, the Embargo Act of 1807 stands as one of the most controversial and consequential pieces of legislation passed during Jefferson's administration. Motivated by the desire to assert American neutrality and to protect American maritime rights amid the rising tensions between Britain and France, the act sought to leverage economic pressure in order to avoid war. And in December of 1807, Congress will pass this bill, which will impose a sweeping ban on American ships sailing to foreign ports, essentially halting all trade with Europe. The rationale behind the embargo was twofold. First, Jefferson had hoped that by depriving Britain and France of American goods and access to American markets, they would recognize American neutrality and they would honor maritime rights of American vessels. Secondly, the embargo aimed to protect American merchant ships from the seizure and impressment of British and French naval forces, a practice that had inflamed the tensions even more between these nations and had caused outrage among Americans. However, the Embargo Act is going to prove to be highly unpopular and economically disastrous. The sudden halt of trade is going to leave merchants devastated when they see markets dry up and their warehouses full of stuff they can't sell. Farmers and manufacturers as well are going to be hit hard by this when they see demand for their goods drop, and this is going to lead to widespread unemployment and economic hardships. But what I want to also point out is this embargo is going to expose the regional tensions that have always existed. You have this Virginian president who has signed into law the Embargo Act, and the regions of the country that are hit hardest by this are the New England states and the Mid-Atlantic states, where shipping forms the backbone of their economy. And so you're going to see a lot of protests ramp up with merchants and sailors and farmers and manufacturers who are going to come out and say this is a clear example of government overreach and economic strangulation. Despite Jefferson's hopes for a quick resolution, Great Britain and France just said, we'll just find other sources for our goods. And they didn't stop trying to disrupt American shipping. In fact, they kind of intensified it. And this is going to lead to, the opposition of the Embargo Act to come to a fever pitch. And by 1809, Congress will finally repeal the Embargo Act and replace it with a less restrictive bill known as the Non-Intercourse Act. On the domestic front, Jefferson's second term saw significant advancements in infrastructure and in exploration, emblematic of Jefferson's administration's commitment to expanding America's horizons. A crowning achievement of this era was the Lewis and Clark expedition, meticulously planned and commissioned by Jefferson to chart the uncharted territories of the newly acquired Louisiana Purchase. Led by Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, the ambitious expedition embarked in 1804 and concluded in 1806, having traversed vast stretches of the American wilderness. The return of the expedition heralded a triumph of American ingenuity and determination, as it provided invaluable scientific and geographical knowledge about the unexplored western frontier. The Lewis and Clark expedition not only solidified America's territorial claims, but also paved the way for further exploration and settlement of the vast and untamed landscapes beyond the Mississippi River. By the end of Jefferson's second term, he will have firmly established his vision for the United States. Following in the footsteps of George Washington, he will not stand for a third term and instead will endorse his good friend James Madison as his successor. Jefferson's presidency saw the United States through a period of great transformation and growth. His leadership in the Louisiana Purchase, the Lewis and Clark expedition, and significant domestic reforms set the stage for the nation's expansion and development in the years to come. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining me. We'll see you next time.